10 hours, maybe more that day. All that they had to eat while they were aboard was what small crab that they could take out of the net, and they had a charcoal brazier on the back of the boat, and they put the crabs on that and cooked them and picked the meat out to eat during the day. But otherwise, they had nothing else to eat all day.
Cap Thompson was a Western Alaskan entrepreneur who struck it rich on the crab grounds.
Cap Thompson is a legend that in the crab days there, that he was extremely competitive. It wasn't unheard of that he would go across the bay and catch a boat underneath the Panalaska's dock under the hoist due to unload in the morning, bring a bottle of whiskey, and when they had a couple of drinks, he'd move the boat himself under his own hoist and have it unloaded before Panalaska woke up the next day. I think Captain Thompson drove his competitors nuts.
Plying the waters of western Alaska, Thompson observed the activities of Wakefield and the other crab pioneers. Armed with a 3-page instructional pamphlet published by the Fish and Wildlife Service, he resolved to launch a processing operation. He acquired a barge and a processing line that some of Wakefield's men had experimented with, then discarded. He announced the establishment of the Aleutian King Crab Company.
And then I put an ad in the Kodiak newspaper that I was going to process crab in the Aleutian Islands, and was urging fishermen to come out there. And so 2 power scows showed up from Kodiak. And when they came, of course, I said to them, look, I don't have a nickel to buy a crab with, but I know where the crab are. And if you're willing to wait, I'd never processed a crab before, why, I'll buy your crab. And I was in it for 5 years. The total investment for Aleutian king crab was $1,610, and sold it for $4 million in 5 years. At that time, that was money, of course, then.
Bob Resoff was another pioneer who would strike it rich in king crab. A Russian Aleut from the tiny village of Ninilchik, he built company after company and sold them to Fortune 500 firms like W.R. Grace and ConAgra. As a businessman, says a contemporary, Resoff always knew when to hold 'em and when to fold 'em. He got his start at the poker table.
Well, anyway, I spent 5 years in the service, and the most pleasure we had was playing poker and dice. And I had a fairly lucky streak. So when I got discharged, I had about $45,000 bucks. And that's been my start.
Alec McGlashan, a Scots Aleut native of Dutch Harbor, served as second harpooner on a whaling ship before signing aboard Wakefield's Deep Sea in 1948. Though he had never worked aboard a trawler, they made him foreman of the deck crew.
Oh, well, I guess from 50 to 300-400 to drag, which dragged an hour. And then really 300-400 to drag. Yeah. I seen one drag that had 1,100 in it. That was the biggest drag I ever had. Yeah.
Lloyd Cannon was among the first Americans on the crab grounds in the post-war era.
First, well, my father got some tango gear, and that would have been in the winter of '47. And I was going to school, but on weekends I'd go out in Couch in Middle Bay and help him pull his tango gear, you know, all by hand off the bottom and untangling the crab out of the nets. You know, the Japanese style, they cut the nets and pull the crab out. My father couldn't afford to cut the net, so we sat there tediously and untangled. You know, we didn't catch very many crab. If we had a crab, we caught 25 crab. It was a big day, and they sold them on the street corners in Kodiak.
Joe Kurtz and the Cook Inlet pioneers in the village of Seldovia decided pots might be the answer to a more efficient crab harvest. They built the first king crab pots out of the frames of surplus army cots.
Took the springs out and knocked the pots apart. It was easy to do. It took a heavy hammer and heavy chisel and one whack, and you cut the rivets. They we put stood two of them up on edge and cut the third one in two and took the pieces that we got out of that for the end pieces. And that ended up with a pot that was about 4 feet by, really it was 63 inches, because that's what a Army cot was.
Other fishermen had experimented with enlarged versions of the round Dungeness crab pot used to the south, but they proved too light to properly tend bottom in rugged Alaskan waters. The Seldovia bed frames produced a superior king crab trap because they were heavier. Industry leaders began experimenting with pot frames made of 3/4-inch iron rod, then 1-inch rod.
When we first started, we had a different type of pots. It was round pots, and they only weighed about 100, 150 pounds at the most. Now they're square pots, 7 by 7, and they weigh up to 700, 800 pounds. And of course they fish a lot more too.
More and more fishermen became aware of the opportunities in king crab, and the harvest began to mushroom. Meanwhile, Wakefield was making inroads in the marketplace with in-the-shell product, especially in the New England states where bright red king crab emerged as an affordably priced substitute for lobster. By the mid-1960s, the good times had started to roll.
We started fishing in Kodiak in about the month of June, and then we moved on up the line, went to Chicknick, Sandpoint, Dutch Harbor, eventually Adak. We stayed in Adak till about March or April, following spring. And then we went back to Seattle, done whatever repair work had to be done on the boat. And in the month of June, we started the cycle all over again. We went to Kodiak and migrated like the crabs.
And we could catch more crabs than they could handle on the processors, and far more than they could sell. So the season in them days was limited to how much money a processor had available to him and how much inventory he could pack. And when he got as much crab as he thought he could sell the rest of the year, everybody stopped and they went down and tried to peddle their products. So in the early days, it wasn't the season that stopped the fishery, it was the ability of the processors to sell a product that they were processing.
Stan Tarrant, whose Pacific American Fisheries Company helped finance Wakefield's crabbing ventures, launched an early processing operation at King Cove. They packed 20,000 cases of product, then tried to figure out what to do with it.
We had a problem selling the canned product. As I mentioned, probably didn't go about it right, but someone conceived the idea in order to dispose of this initial pack of ours of 20,000 cases to put out a circular with our brokers offering 25 cents if they send the label off a can of king crab, and we'd send them 25 cents. Well, of course, that was 1955, but believe it or not, that did it.
At first, the crab fleet was a ragtag armada of wooden vessels converted from other fisheries. Although these boats often looked like accidents waiting to happen, the fishermen generally arrived home safely in the early years.
I think in the early days you had more fishermen that were experienced seamen.
Back in those days, a lot of those boats, they didn't sink too often because everybody was scared. You know, you always figured they were going to sink, but they didn't sink. And you get these big steel rigs up here now, they're with all the electronics and insulated with all the communications and everything, and they're flopping over left and right. So I think being scared is probably served everybody pretty well.
The big profits soon produced much larger steel vessels. Seattle area shipyards began building crab boats at a furious pace.
1960, but then, you know, we wanted to go to Dutch Harbor and Adak and the Bering Sea, and it wasn't going to be done on a 54-foot boat built in 1917, I'll tell you that.